Welcome to the Social Newsroom. My name is Kate Shira. Today, we delve deep into matters environmental conservation and, of course, even agriculture and how it's affecting Kenya today. As you've seen the topic we have posted all over online, green imperialism. We said we're going to have this conversation because we cannot sit aside and watch things change. Instead, we will take the forefront and get the information from people who participate in conservation and agriculture, agroecologies. My guest today is the very beautiful Claire Nasike Akello, who is one of the biggest champions when it comes to environmental science and agroecology. She's a writer and has been awarded by the Wangari Maathai Scholarship Awardee. She's an awardee of that. And we're going to be delving deep into green imperialism. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Kate, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to meet you as well. From where you stand, where do you feel Kenya lies when it comes to environmental conservation?
I think we have a long way to go.
Yes.
And I say so from the point of conserving the environment for Kenyans to enjoy and utilize. Because most of our environmental conservation initiatives are not benefiting Kenyans.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have a really long way to go. And we have to cut ourselves off the elite conservation.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, because right now when you tell anyone I'm an environmentalist, I'm a conservationist, you're looked at as the elite few. So our conservation is very elite. It doesn't address the needs of the local Kenyans. I'll give you an example. How many Kenyans would like, or Nairobians would like to cycle to work, but do they have cycling lanes? No, that's part of environmentalism.
Yes.
How many green spaces do we have in Nairobi today? Very few. Abadeas, our water sources, what's happening to them? They're actually shrinking day by day.
Yes.
So when you look at it from that standpoint, then you see that our environmental activism, our environmental laws are not for the benefit of Kenyans.
Yet. We still have a long way to go.
We still have a long way to go.
One of the topics we've highlighted today is green imperialism. Is this the new age of neo-colonialism? That's a big question. But let's delve into green imperialism. I could say it refers to the imposition of environmental policies or conservation practices by external actors, often the Western nations from where I stand, or organizations or other regions, typically the global south. In context, Kenya and Africa is the term that is using it in a ways which environmental conservation and policies can sometimes reflect colonial legacies and power dynamics, which local communities need, rights, and may be overshadowed by external interests. We are aware of the big conversation on environmental conservation. We had one of the biggest conferences last year, the Africa Climate Summit, right here in Kenya. And why is there a big shift to have Africa participate in environmental conservation? Let's just start there. Why is there a big shift to have Africa participate in, climate change conservation in the first place?
That's a very good question, Kate.
Yes.
I think for Africa to participate in environmental conservation, first of all, is about addressing the needs of its people. Okay. So if Africa is participating in any environmental conservation, in any climate change conferences, it should be about the needs and the sovereignty of its people. But what we've seen previously with most of these conferences and most of these summits, Africa often carries the interests of Western countries. Okay. So it does not represent the interests of its people. If you look at some of the declarations that come out of these conferences, Africa does not have, it's not at the table, to be honest. And if you're speaking sincerely about this. For example, last year we had the Africa Climate Summit, and it was all over the news. We saw President William Ruto in a tiny yellow car.
Yes.
It was
an electric car, no?
An electric car, right? Yeah.
It's called the Hustler car.
Yeah.
Yes.
How long did it last?
It looked like a photo op, if you ask me. I think the ride from State House to the CBD It was a ride from State House to CBD, just a few kilometers, because State House to CBD is not too far. You could cycle all the way or...
Or walk, you know. It's not very far away.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes.
So we as Africans are participating in these summits that our leaders are actually pushing the interests of other countries or the needs of other countries other than ours as Africans. So we're just puppets. We are there to push other people's, other countries' agendas, except our own.
Awesome.
I mean, look at what's happening. You know, one of the things that I saw from the Africa Climate Summit was largely on carbon markets here. On carbon markets, just before the Africa Climate Summit, Kenya had amended, I think, 2 of its pertinent legislation on climate change, the 2016 Climate Change Act and the Carbon Markets and Trading Bill or something of that sort, you know, to include aspects of carbon markets and to define who a community is. And one of the contentious things, I think, in the Carbon Market and Trading Bill or Act, it defines a community as people who can be displaced from their land to allow for carbon credits or projects that are carbon credit related to take place. And so when you see our government pushing for carbon markets, and recently I think we saw the new Minister for Environment, Aden Duale, meeting with Miss Meg Whitman, and they want to establish a carbon market in Kenya. And then you're wondering, in whose interest is this? Who is benefiting from this? We know that the West, for example, has industrialized. They have developed off, you know, fossil fuels. For the longest time, they have developed off fossil fuels.
Yes, they are.
And now we have this push that, you know, we need to sell credits, we as Africans, and we are selling credits in form of our land at the expense of our manufacturing industries. I see carbon markets, for example, which is fronted as a solution to the climate crisis. It is a way of, or a scheme rather, of seeing that African countries do not grow their manufacturing industries. Because how do we create jobs? Through manufacturing industries, right? So these countries have already created manufacturing industries in their homes, and now they want to come to us and tell us, let us sell credits. Why are we selling credits? What's the value of these credits to the African people? I've been in conversations with farmers who have never been paid for the carbon credits. They never saw the money. They were told, you know, you will be paid. They never saw the money. And we're not even going into the land aspect, you know, just that it is stopping Africans from growing their manufacturing industry. It's like a distant dream. We will never achieve this dream. You know, it's like someone giving you money, and that money you don't know.
What is the goal for it?
What is the goal? What am I going to use it for? And how long am I going to be given this money? It's like a handout, you know. So how long am I going to be given this money? And this money, what is it benefiting? What is it helping me with?
The education behind carbon credits is still hasn't been explored, especially for the local farmers.
No, for the local farmers it hasn't, and we've had cases where some of the, you know, carbon credits sold have actually been suspended. On the basis of, like, there are problems with the validation and the methodology, you know.
With the carbon credits registry as well.
And they have been actually, like, I think, was it last year, The Guardian published a research that 94% of the credits sold do not reduce carbon emission.
I want us to go back a little bit. One of the biggest effects of climate change has got to be, you know, the greenhouse gases. And it is said that one of the biggest producers of greenhouse gases, which is carbon dioxide and methane, is agriculture. Basically, Africa and Kenya, let's be specific about Kenya, one of the biggest contributors to our economy is agriculture. If agriculture is being seen as one of the biggest emitters of these greenhouse gases, how is it affecting agricultural laws right now? Because we're seeing a few implementations of agricultural laws to either regulate how farmers are, participating in climate change, and are they fully aware? Are you seeing the laws? Are they really stringent, or are they flexible for the local farmers if agriculture is a big contributor to climate change?
I think when it comes to some of the laws and policies that have actually been passed,
Yes.
they're hiding behind addressing the climate crisis.
Okay.
But there's a bigger agenda to it. And I'll just explain on a few. For example, there's this push to move towards, use of inputs.
Yes.
That's chemical pesticides, chemical fertilizers, hybrid seeds. There's this push to adopt new technology. So new technology here is genetically modified organisms. There's this push, and not only in Kenya. If you look at the African Union as well, African Union has the Agenda 2063. Yes. Agenda 2063, when you look at it in terms of agriculture, there's a heavy focus on making sure that Africans use a lot of inputs, so chemical pesticides, fertilizers, hybrid seeds, and there's also, digitizing agriculture, what they call also modernizing agriculture. And when you evaluate what they mean by modernizing agriculture, it has to do with large-scale agriculture.
Yes.
And large-scale agriculture largely contributes to greenhouse gas emissions than small-scale agriculture. And I think we also need to move away from calling it small-scale,
yes,
because this is family-owned farming. Our communities have been farming. Yeah. So it's not really small-scale because it feeds us. If you look at the statistics, 80% of the food we consume today, and I'll narrow down to Kenya, yes, 80% of the food we consume is grown by the small-scale farmers. Yeah. So if it is indeed grown by the small-scale farmers, and we have policies, for example, recently there was the Livestock Bill 2024, yes, that was going to make it illegal for farmers to sort of process supplements to give their livestock. Yes. What does that mean to a pastoralist? That's killing self-sufficiency. So most of these policies and laws are hiding behind, solving the climate crisis, but they're also about killing self-sufficiency. Yes. Because once you tell a pastoralist that you cannot process your own supplement for your cows and all that, what do you expect? You want them to be buying this supplement from you for their livestock, right? Will that be sustainable? No, it is not. Yes. So that's killing self-sufficiency. When we move towards, there's a seed law in Kenya, I think it was passed way in the 1970s, the Seed and Plant Varieties Act makes it illegal for smallholder farmers to share, sell, or exchange indigenous seeds, right? Yes. This is a practice that has existed in the African communities for a very long time. So when you introduce such kind of a law, that law is geared towards killing self-sufficiency and creating an economic dependency on companies that actually produce the seeds, companies that produce the supplements for the livestock. Yes. So some of these laws are not in the best interest of Africans. They are not focused on helping Africans, adapt or mitigate the climate crisis. Yes. But they are promoting, their own self-interests. So if we can prevent people in Kenya or farmers in Kenya from doing this, then we can make money. And if you look at the seed industry, for example, it's a very, very huge industry. Yes, it is. They are bringing in billions of, of dollars annually. So it's just about killing self-sufficiency and creating profits for these companies that deal with these fertilizers and pesticides. And for pesticides, for example, only 5% of the pesticides are actually used in Africa. So these pesticides companies, they see a market here. Potential. Yeah, so there's a potential market for them to sell their products in Africa. And that's why you see even like at the AU level, we have a whole Agenda 2063 that is looking at making Africans use more inputs. Why? Because there's the people pushing the policy behind. They want to create profits for themselves.
So we can say for sure some of this, laws and initiatives are innately undermining the traditional ways of sustainability, because there have been already sustainable ways, farming methods.
Yes, there has been.
that exist.
Yeah, we've had that.
Which are some of the most popular sustainable methods that Africans, and especially Kenyans, have already been practicing?
Agroecology.
Yes.
I grew up in Budalangi.
Yes.
I used to see my grandparents, farm.
Yes.
And
what were they farming?
For the longest time, we had millet, pumpkins, kunde, call it cowpeas. We had all the traditional vegetables on our farm. We had cassava, we had sweet potatoes on one farm. I do not recall a single day when we had to go buy food.
And these are legumes and also carbohydrates
yes,
as well?
We had legumes, vegetables, carbohydrates, nuts, everything. We had them in the farm.
Yes.
And I don't recall a single day when my grandfather or my grandmother went to the market center to buy fertilizer, to buy pesticides. Somehow they knew, because I remember I used to see millets and sometimes maize intercropped with groundnuts, intercropped with, cowpeas. So later on, when I was going through school, I was like, oh, yeah, so they knew what they were doing. Cowpeas is nitrogen fixing. Yeah. Maize doesn't fix any nitrogen in the soil. So they knew what they were doing when they were intercropping. So one of the practices that we're seeing get lost as a result of this is the local farming practices. Today, if you ask the young generation or the young farmers, for example, how do you save seed? The practice and culture of saving seed, how do you save it? How do you select the seed to use for the next planting season? How do you crossbreed two plant species to get a higher species? How do you do that? Most of this knowledge has been lost, and this is traditional knowledge. We used to have traditional silos where we would store the seeds.
Yes.
We don't have that anymore. And now we are dependent on agrovet shops to purchase seeds for planting. Yet back then, I remember my grandmother had a grass-thatched kitchen.
Yes.
And she would keep her seeds in there. So the smoke from the firewood would actually preserve the seeds. And then she would also keep some in gourds and the baskets, and then she would mix with cow dung. So the seeds would not be affected by, infested by weevils. So that's one way of, that's knowledge. That's knowledge that is in seed preservation.
Yes.
But we are losing that because we have become economically dependent on the agrovets who sell us the seeds. And these seeds sometimes, I've worked with farmers for a long while now.
Yes.
And most of the farmers say that some of the seeds they buy from the agrovets fail to germinate. But the seeds they keep for themselves, the local seeds, germinate.
And that's a clear attack on the food bank of Kenya.
Yes, that is actually an attack. That's an attack on self-sufficiency. That's an attack on sovereignty. Because as a people, we need to have the power to choose what kind of food I want to eat. I need to be able to select and say, I'm going to grow this on my farm. I don't want someone dictating what I'll grow on my farm.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what we as Africans need to understand. So we're not fighting technology. We're not fighting innovation in agriculture, no. Yes. What we are saying is Africans need to have a choice, and that's what we call food sovereignty.
Yeah.
What do I grow? What do I eat? How does it end up on my farm? And that food sovereignty comes from seed sovereignty. What do I sow in my soil? Is it seed that I have the knowledge of how to breed it? Can I share it with my friend? Can I share it with a fellow farmer? Can I sell the extra? Because what happens is that the food we grow, the surplus, we end up selling.
Yes.
Yeah, so if you're prohibiting that, you're killing self-sufficiency in our country.
As an agroecologist, how are you advocating for resilient farming systems?
Resilient farming systems are rooted in, first of all, land ownership.
Yes.
Food and seed sovereignty.
Okay.
So when we speak about food and seed sovereignty, we're not talking about farmers alone. We're also talking about pastoralists.
Yes.
So pastoralists should be allowed to continue with their way of life.
Yes.
We should not have policies that impede their way of life. So that's resilient farming, because that's what they know how to do. We shouldn't have conservancies hiving off huge tracts of land that pastoralists use for grazing their cattle, for grazing their goats, We shouldn't have that, because there's a reason why that land is an open space. When it's dry on one end, they can move to the other end.
Yes.
The reason we are seeing a lot of conflicts in most of these areas with the conservancies is because of that. The communities do not have the greener pastures that they used to have for their livestock anymore.
Yes.
So that's also resilient farming. Now, when I move to specifically crops, we need to allow communities to use their indigenous seeds.
Yes.
Their local seeds. The seeds that they can easily find. They don't have to buy. If you walk into a seed bank, you can be able to get seeds to plant. We have cases now in Kenya where farmers are abandoning farming because it's become too expensive. They have to buy the seeds, they have to buy the chemical pesticides, they have to buy the chemical fertilizers. And here's the catch.
Yes.
We have organizations and companies in Kenya offering farmers loans to purchase all these things. And we've seen how erratic our weather patterns have been, you know, as a result of climate change, right?
Yes.
We've had extreme weather events. So there are seasons where when we thought we would get rain, but we didn't get any rain.
Yes.
So this farmer has taken loans to purchase the agricultural inputs, right?
Yeah.
And then plants, and there's no rain. What happens? They have to pay back the loan, right?
Yes.
So that means they take another loan to pay that other loan.
Meaning the productivity of
Exactly, and also tying
itself.
them
Yes.
on a cycle of poverty.
Of debt.
Yes, they are forever in debt. So when you see farmers abandoning their farms, their land, to come and be security guards in Nairobi, to go and look for menial jobs in city centers, and then what happens to the land? The land is abandoned, right?
And it could be acquired by someone else.
Exactly. The land is abandoned, and then someone will come in and say, I would like to form a cooperative and, you know, take this piece of land because it's idle, so I want to take it. And they have the money and the power and the, you know, and the resources, right?
Yes.
They can do that. So what will stop them? Absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So we've lost our self-sufficiency. So farming has been made extremely expensive by curtailing some of the resilient ways in which communities can actually grow food. So agroecology is one aspect of that, of resilient farming. Teaching farmers how to use the locally available resources,
Yes.
conserving water, conserving the soil, which is something industrial agriculture does not take into consideration.
It's important to note that you have mentioned land acquisition, and we cannot turn a blind eye to realizing that for the past year plus, there has been a large acquisition, land acquisition by, you know, foreigners into the country. We have foreigners from Saudi Arabia who've picked up large tracts of land, and local Kenyans are unaware of these activities. What is the best way to mitigate for them to be aware of what is happening within their communities? What is the best way for them to turn to?
I think one of the best ways is taking those laws to the people.
Okay.
That's one, because some of these laws are passed in between the corridors of power. We have no access to them.
Yes.
Like the livestock bill was proposed, we didn't know about it until later. The Seed and Plant Varieties Act was amended way back in 2012. We Kenyans are actually only acting on it now in 2024. So one of the best ways is when some of these laws are passed, as young people who've read these laws and professionals in these spaces, let's take this to our people and in the languages they understand. I like to refer to the example of the finance bill. There's a young gentleman by the name Mike Mushiri, what he did with the finance bill, you know, translating that to various languages. And I think that's what we need to do. Aside from that, like, you know, once our communities understand what is at stake, and land is a very sensitive matter in Kenya. It's very critical as well. We cannot speak about agriculture without land. Land is a very key factor of production.
Yes.
So we need to also work with the communities. So how do we stop our land from being stolen, from being grabbed? How do we stop these politicians? Is it through the courts? Is it through public participation? How do we stop this? Because we need to to be informed.
Yeah.
And when we're informed, we inform the others. We've seen what is happening in Tanzania.
Yeah.
You know, their land, they're being chased off their land because it's been grabbed by some UAE company that is interested in carbon credits, right?
Yes.
We've seen what is happening in Uganda. Communities were actually just off their land. 2,900 acres were set aside
For
reforestation linked to carbon credits.
yes.
Same thing happening in the DRC. 2 million acres of land in Niger
Yes.
were awarded to a US company, African Agriculture, for a project on carbon credits.
Yes.
So what is this? Some of these laws are being passed. I'm sure there are so many communities that if you went to them today, they don't even have they don't know that they exist, the 2016, the amendment of the 2016 Climate Change Act to include carbon markets.
Yes.
And the carbon trading bill, you know, the one that was amended to include community, the one I spoke about at the beginning.
Yes.
They have no idea that actually there's a bill that actually says, you know, a community can be evicted from their land to pave way for a project on carbon credits.
Yeah.
So we need to make our people aware. We need to know what is happening in our country. And that is just being now politically proactive
Yes.
citizens.
Yes.
And unfortunately, our leaders have gotten us there. But as young Africans, we need to stand up for our countries. We need to be aware of what is happening because we cannot afford to leave our country and go.
This is where we belong.
This is home. This is where we belong.
Yeah.
And home has to work for us. And if it means challenging the policy makers, the decision makers to pass laws that actually favor us, we have to do that.
We have no choice.
Yeah, we have no choice. The people in power, sadly, are more interested in their stomachs and their pockets. They want to oil their pockets. They are not interested in what happens to us. So we have to stand up for ourselves.
One of the aspects of green imperialism, which is what we're highlighting today on the social newsroom, and remember, we're on all social media platforms. You can send a comment or even a question. We'd love to hear from you. And one of the aspects is now ecotourism, which is, you know, it's an economic benefit that we see here in Kenya, especially because tourism is one of our biggest markets. But it's clearly a double-edged sword, if we're to say the truth. It prioritizes on foreign tourists and their experiences versus local communities. You have mentioned the acquisition of a big conservation land. You know, we have maybe the Kitrira Conservation Elephant Project somewhere in this country, not necessarily one that exists, but just a name to kind of put it in context. How did we get, especially with ecotourism, being one of the fronts for, you know, climate change, and how do we move from it? Because remember, as Africans, we have been able to coexist with nature and instilling some of the laws of the land with animals. There's certain animals that live with us, and we grow with them, and it works for us. How do we counter ecotourism, because it is being fronted as a way for green imperialism?
Ecotourism, and I think Dr. Mordecai Ogada speaks very well about this, and he's written an amazing book, The Big Conservation Lie.
Yes.
I think it's one of the books I read immediately after campus, and I'm really, really glad that I read it because it shaped my thought process on conservation. And when we speak of ecotourism, first of all, tourism is a byproduct of conservation. That's what Dr. Ogada says. I actually quote him.
Tourism is a
byproduct of conservation. So what that means is that we are conserving for the local communities, for the local communities to enjoy, to utilize. We are not conserving for the tourists. It's for us to enjoy. But has that been the case in our country? No. I mean, look at the Magical Kenya website. What do you see?
Oh, well.
Yeah.
You have to click on it to see it.
Yeah, so when you just click on that, you have all your answers.
Yeah.
So ecotourism is supposed to work for us, and sadly, that has not been the case. We have conservancies in areas like in the northern part of Kenya, where communities have no water But these conservancies have huge swimming pools. Yet these communities have no water to drink. These communities cannot even access these conservancies because of the cost. And if they do access these conservancies, they are fronted for beadwork.
Ah.
Right?
To serve a very specific role, which
a
is still for tourism.
Role,
yeah.
Which is still for tourism. You're taking away women who would otherwise were helpful in other aspects of building their community. You're bringing them to do beadwork.
You've minimized their role in the society.
You've minimized their role. You've created a dependency. There's a knowledge that has been lost in between.
Yes.
So tourism, ecotourism being fronted as an adaptive strategy or a mitigative strategy to the climate crisis, I think it should be looked at from the community's perspective first before tourists. So ecotourism needs to serve the people. It needs to protect and conserve the environment of the local communities. We've seen cases of people complaining about, Masai Mara, this camp has built too close to the river, or this camp has blocked the path of the wildebeest, right?
Yes.
Is that the right way to do ecotourism?
No, it's not, because
it's not.
With nature and wildlife, the constant of the environment is what it follows all the time. We saw with the building of the SGR, the elephants did not change their course even when the building of the train was happening. They'll still follow the course. So you have to either build around them or customize something that will make sense. But then you see that now threatens one of the biggest contributors of Kenya's GDP, which is tourism.
I'll take you back.
Okay.
During COVID, there are no tourists, right?
Oh, yes. Yes.
Weren't hotels operating?
They did operate. They did.
They did.
Yes.
I think what has happened, we've made this space so elite that we've locked out Kenyans. We've locked out Africans. Because during COVID, a lot of Kenyans were actually traveling. Hotels were depending on local travel and local tourists.
Yes.
Yeah.
We saw the rise of something we call in social media staycations.
Yes.
Yes.
So if that happened during COVID, why is it not capable of happening now? Yeah, it just means that we have made this an elite space and we've closed it to a certain group of people that can only afford such kind of charges. Like why would you have a conservancy in an area like Marsabit where the community from Marsabit cannot access? This is their natural resource.
Yes.
And the constitution, by virtue of this being their natural resources, they are supposed to benefit from it first, not even the tourists. The communities are supposed to benefit from it first because the constitution allows us. These are our genetic resources, so we're supposed to benefit from it. So why are we not benefiting from it? Because the people we have put at the helm, let's say at the ministries of environment, Ministry of Tourism, they don't value the role that communities play.
Yes.
Ours is elite conservation, where we're looking at how many dollars can these tourists bring into our country. We need to conserve so that, it looks good. When a prince comes to our country, we can put the red carpet and, everything looks good.
Yeah.
But we're not thinking, is this working for the Kenyan people? And that actually relates to some of the protests we've been seeing in the country.
Yes.
There's a correlation. Things are not working for us. I would like to go out and walk in a green space. There are very few green spaces right now in Nairobi. Even the one Wangari Maathai fought for. Uhuru Park, how many Kenyans can access it now? For how long has it been locked?
They just recently opened it, so,
Yeah. Aside from Karura and, let's say, Ololua Forest, Ngong Road Forest, there are very few green spaces in Nairobi. And as human beings, we need to be exposed to green spaces.
Yes.
So our country is approaching conservation and environmentalism from an elite perspective. It's not working for us, people. And it's only a matter of time. It's a matter of time before Kenyans stand up and claim their resources, claim their rights. Yeah.
as an environmental scientist and an agroecologist yourself, Claire, I want to know when do we find the fine line between modernization or urbanization of our country? Because then, as much as we want to conserve the environment, we have an ever-growing community, and we have to accommodate them, even as this, even with this conservation and changing climate change, and being on the forefront of that, because Africa is the greenest, if we are to say the truth. We are the greenest continent in the world, but we have to realize that we have to move with times, with modernization. We're seeing the growth of a lot of constructions of high-rise buildings, and the building of roads, even through forests, to accommodate the growing number of people. From where you stand, what is the best solution moving forward? Because a growing society has to find a place to grow itself as well, but yet still conserve the environment.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll ask you a question
Yes.
before I answer your question.
Okay.
How do you define modernization?
I could say modernization for me is a growth in infrastructure.
Growth in infrastructure,
Yes.
right?
Like
so
of expressways, and things like that.
So
To be able to access.
the buildings we have, the high-rise buildings, all that, that's modernization, yeah?
We could say that, yes.
We could say that. Yeah. Okay. I'll start with a quote by the late Nobel laureate, Professor Wangari Maathai. Development doesn't need to harm the environment. I'll start there. And then I'll move to the second thing, modernization. Is living in an apartment where there's no sunlight, there's no access to green space. Is that modernization?
It's convenience.
That's not modernization.
Yes.
Yeah. Actually, the person who lives in the village in a grass-thatched house and has access to his own or her own compound,
Yes.
that's a very modernized person. Yeah. This is not modernization. Skyscrapers, concrete jungle, that's not modernization. That's retrogression.
Okay.
Because as human beings, we need to have access to green spaces. We need to be self-sufficient. We need to be able to grow our own food. We need to be able to keep our cattle, our chickens, goats. We need to be able to do that. So for me, modernization is that, where we have buildings in our cities that allow for people to have that. I can move out of my living room and sit in my garden. My children can be able to play in the garden, because that has an overall effect on well-being. We're seeing a lot of issues to do with depression. All that, in one way or another, they're linked to the environment.
Yes.
So for me, modernization, we're looking at having green spaces, having access to food. You can grow your own food. You're building houses that allow us to do that. Back then, when I was a child, Nairobi was the green city under the sun, right?
Yes.
I remember we used to live in Buru, phase 4.
Yeah.
And we had our own compound. We had guavas, we had loquats, we had a tiny garden, And it was lovely. We would get out of the house and sit in the sun. That's the same thing I experienced while I was in Budalangi. So that's how we need to build our cities. That's modernization. And the argument that the population is increasing, we need to have more buildings, right? I'll ask you a question again, or I'll pose a question to you again.
Yes.
December, during the Christmas holidays or Easter, Nairobi is a deserted city, right?
Pretty empty.
Where are people?
Back to the village.
So do we have a housing problem?
We really don't.
No, we don't have a housing problem. Because people go to the villages.
Yes.
The roads are pretty empty. The malls are deserted. There's nobody. So we don't have a housing problem. And we cannot use the argument that population is rising, so we need to come up with, all these buildings. No. What we are witnessing is corruption. This is corruption. People are, money laundering through these buildings, through these malls. That's how they can justify, their source of income.
Yes.
And we have accepted it. And what we are seeing is that the quality of life is reducing. People are no longer happy because walking from Westlands to town, you'll probably have been mugged.
Mugged, and all
The
your
air pollution, the
carbon
matatus,
dioxide.
you know, then do these motorbikes.
True confession, every time you're coming back to Nairobi, you literally feel a change in your spirit, in your aura. As soon as you get into the city, if you have been away for Easter or Christmas, as you say, you already feel, oh,
I'm back to this concrete jungle again. Or when you go home, and I've seen many people say this, or I've heard them say this, the food in the village tastes different from the food in Nairobi.
Even what we are consuming as a people.
That's what, and that's how life ought to be. The life in the villages.
Yes.
But our leaders have made us believe that, you know, living in a tiny apartment
With a
lift, you're actually living the life. But you're not. You're actually poor. That's what I would say. You're poor. Rich is the man who has a compound, even in the village, can grow your own food. You have your own cattle. You can walk in the morning to, you know, to the kitchen space and pick your eggs. That's a man who's rich.
As you say that, I want to ask you a question, because one of the initiatives as an agroecologist is to localize farming.
Yeah.
What are some of the counterbacks you've gotten as you go down to the community, either from government or other NGOs? What are some of the fightbacks you've gotten every time you are pushing for the localization of farming?
One of the major thing or challenge that I have encountered is the fight that, you know, that we are against technology. We are against innovation. And so we want African people to die of hunger, you know, because there's population increase. And so we need to use technology to, you know, feed Africans. So that's the challenge that we've always experienced. And the technology is always in the form of hybrid seeds. The technology is always in the form of genetically modified seeds. And I think people confuse the two. We are not fighting technology.
Yes.
We are fighting against self-insufficiency that is propagated by the adoption of these technologies. So I'll give a very clear example. Adoption of the BT cotton. I think it was in 2022 or 2021, thereabout.
Yeah.
It was introduced, and it was my home county, Busia County. Farmers adopted it. A few months later, there was an outcry. There was no seeds. There was no BT cotton seeds.
Okay.
And the ones that were available in the market were expensive. Farmers were saying, I think they were paying 2,500 Kenya shillings for a kilogram. And farmers were actually complaining that their prices are too high. Yeah. So compare this to the local seeds that farmers have and translate this to a key crop, let's say like maize, like millet, or
legumes.
You know, legumes, kunde, whatever, beans. So we don't have control over our seeds. We're depending on an external supplier, because at that time I remember one of the guys, I think from the National Biosafety Authority, he mentioned that there's a shortage in the supply of the seeds. So the farmers had to wait. So imagine we're dealing with a key crop. The rains are here. There's a shortage of the seeds. What happens? Food insecurity. What happens to our sovereignty? We cannot choose. So we have to sit and wait for somebody to bring those seeds for us. Will we have food on our plate? No.
We'll have to look for other ways to get food on our plates.
Precisely. And that other way is imports, food imports. The same people selling us these seeds, when they see they've delayed to supply the seeds, they'll be like, oh, there's no food in Kenya at the moment, right? So let's capitalize on this moment. Let's export the food to Kenya.
Could we say they are creating a problem to sell a solution?
Of course, they are creating a problem to sell a solution. And it's all about creating an economic dependence so that they can keep on raking in profits. Yeah. So the issue to do with seeds, You don't want farmers to use seeds that they can actually use, reuse every planting season. You want them to depend on hybrids that lose their vigor after second planting season. So they're creating a business for you when they buy the seeds.
Yes.
You're selling seeds, hybrid seeds that are dependent on chemical fertilizers and pesticides.
Yeah.
So you are creating a market for your products. In turn, you're killing self-sufficiency. If some of these seeds fail to germinate, you are ready with your produce to export to our country. What happens to our ability to grow food ourselves? Not even grow food. Let's talk about employment.
Yes.
Agriculture has the highest employment multiplier effect.
Yes.
You know, we can create industries from agriculture, right? Value addition, processing, infrastructure, roads can actually be created as a result of agriculture, right?
Yes.
We can supply foods to hospitals, so that means we're taking care of the health industry, right?
Yes. We're supplying within to every industry, even to schools.
To schools.
Yeah.
So when you cut our ability to produce food, you've cut our ability to grow in so many ways as a nation. Our kids will not have access to safe food. I mean, how many times have we, in Kenya, have we imported food that is contaminated? Sugar laced with mercury, maize full of aflatoxins. You know, we've seen it all. So we are exposing our people to food that is of substandard quality and killing the self-sufficiency of our citizens. So we can't grow food, we can't produce milk, we can't keep chicken and have fresh eggs, nice Kenyeji eggs. So that's what is happening, and that's the challenge that we have experienced in this space, where we are fought that we are against technology. But what we are advocating for is the sovereignty of the people, sovereignty of the Kenyan people.
Yes.
We want us to be self-sufficient. I'm below 35 years right now.
Yeah.
I want, by 40, I want to live in my own compound. I don't want to live in an apartment. I want my children to experience, you know, gardening. I want my children to know how to milk cows. I want them
have
to
life skills.
Yes, life skills. We want them to know how to make butter, like real butter. How do we make butter from milk? We want them to know that.
To be self-sufficient.
Precisely, self-sufficiency. We want them to be sovereign. And there's a famous saying by, I think, one of Africa's greatest sons, Thomas Sankara. He who feeds you controls you. If you look at your plate and all you can see is wheat that has been imported, all you can see are burgers and pizzas.
Carbohydrates.
That's the highest form of imperialism. If you look at your plate right now, you have rice, all those things. Just know you've been colonized. Again, through food.
Oh. Do you feel like we are ready for this conversation as a people? Because clearly political minds have a different thought when it comes to green imperialism. They don't even see it because the pockets that we're getting from Arabian countries and West African countries, Western countries, not West African, Western countries buying tracts of land. We already know that they're not going to be part of this conversation. We, as a people, are the ones who need to have this conversation. Do you feel like we are ready to have it?
It's not a matter of being ready. We will be forced to have it.
Okay.
When lifestyle diseases skyrocket, when our children are battling obesity, we will be forced to have it.
And you just spoke about obesity and, you know, one of the viral stories about children missing and others passing away from, you know, activities in school, which were forced by teachers. It's something we're already witnessing as we speak.
Yeah. And you cannot separate all those issues. You can't. They are interlinked. That's a conversation for another time, but they are interlinked.
Yes.
If you look at our education systems, how we are treated, there's an aspect of imperialism in that.
Yes.
Look at CBC, and Dr. Wandia Njoya speaks a lot about it. There's an aspect of imperialism in that.
In a whole new system of learning. We have a lot of countering to do.
We have a lot of countering to do. And we need to start in our specific areas of expertise. And that's why I speak about this.
Tell me some of the initiatives you are participating in yourself.
I've been involved in various of them, but the one notable one, I think, when I was working with Greenpeace Africa, we started a court process, the litigation, on the seed campaign. So that's, I think that was way back in 2021 and 2022. So I was the project lead for that.
Yes.
So the court process, you hear about this seed law and all that. I was the person behind it when I was with Greenpeace Africa. Yes. So that's my way of contributing to my country. We looked through the law and we saw that this law does not support farmers. Yeah, it does not advocate for farmers' rights. So we worked with various partners and we had the case filed in court. So we are hoping that when the judgment is made, that it will be in favor of the farmers, because we need to take care of, our resources. We need to take control of our resources, and seeds are very critical. So that's one. The second thing is I teach children. So through my own volunteer initiative, that's the Hummingbird Foundation, I set up food gardens. This is organic food gardens for school children into areas within Nairobi. So we teach them, their lessons, actually weekly lessons. Teach them about seeds, teach them about environment, about consumption, vegetables, how do you grow vegetables, the detriment that pesticides do to the environment, the fertilizers. We teach them how to make compost and all those things. And those are life skills, I'm teaching these children something that I was also taught. Yes. I grew up with my grandparents. I was born in Nairobi.
To have the farming experience.
Yeah, I was. I was born in Nairobi. I'm a mix of, best of both worlds.
Most of us.
Yeah, born in Nairobi, but partly raised in Budalangi and then came back to Nairobi. So I learned a lot from my grandmother specifically. Yes. My grandmother was a herbalist and a midwife. So our compound had a lot of medicinal trees. I know a lot of medicinal trees. And so that knowledge that I learned, that traditional knowledge, because that knowledge, I've gone through school until master's level. I've studied environment, but that knowledge that my grandmother taught me.
Still not in the books.
No, it's not there. And that's why we need to value traditional knowledge, local knowledge and indigenous knowledge. We need to value it. So that knowledge, it's not in the books. Yes. That same knowledge.
It's not accredited.
No, it isn't.
But still giving results.
Giving results. I refer to that knowledge when I'm teaching farmers. Yes. I refer to that knowledge when I'm teaching these children. And so my work is, not even my work, my purpose is to teach these children how to grow food, how to be healthy in a world that is consistently moving towards fast foods, foods that are not nutritious. So how do we value food? Yeah. How do we enjoy consuming our indigenous foods? Yes. People ask me what I eat, and I'm like, I don't eat rice, I don't eat wheat. And they're like, what do you eat? I'm like, is sorghum and millet a joke to you? Sweet potatoes, cassava, pumpkins.
Those are the originals.
Those are the originals. Yeah. We just need to learn ways of cooking them. We need to teach the younger generation, culinary skills of our local and indigenous foods. And that's what I do through the Hummingbird Foundation. Wow. So I teach those children how to do that.
I will say this, you are a threat to imperialism in a big way, because once you educate an African person of their indigenous way to eat and live, you are countering the narrative of the white way of living. So you are a threat to...
Proudly so. Proudly so.
You're ready for the fight.
Because, I've been raised on those foods. Okay. My great-grandmother lived up to 118 years old. I never saw her eat wheat in any single day. Any single day, never. I never saw her take soda. My grandfather lived up to 94 years old. He could still walk straight. Wow. And I recall, whenever we would cook cabbage at home, he'd be like, oh my God, you guys have cooked this vegetable that is just crunchy and I can't eat it.
It's not green.
It is not what he knows as food.
Ah.
Because he knew the managu,
the traditional,
saga, the traditional vegetables. So then we have this vegetable
that I introduced into the system.
Yeah, that he doesn't know. And for the longest time he said that. So we knew when we cook cabbage in the house, we have to make traditional vegetables for my grandfather.
It's one of the biggest fights to do when even in our schools, the learning of the food pyramid. Remember it? That food pyramid is really off to what a 94-year-old man used to eat.
Yeah. I mean, look at our houses. Let's start at our houses. On Sundays, what do we eat?
We don't cook on Sunday. But
KFC. You know, all the fast foods. I don't want to mention the brands, but
yes,
all the fast foods, that's what we eat.
yeah.
And our palates have adapted to that because of the chemicals, because of the additives in those foods. So our palates do not know how the real food tastes like, such that when you give your child brown ugali today, they'll be like, Mommy, this tastes horrible.
Because it's not what you're accustomed to.
They're not accustomed to it. And what is happening is that we're seeing a lot of marketing, fast food marketing to children. All these fast food joints, just take a closer look. You will see a lot of marketing. They even have coloring cartoons, you know, for children with the junk food. So they are
such an environment that's conducive for a child to be okay with.
They are actually conditioning their children, the children, because when they do that, they get these children addicted to the junk food. This child will be business for them, or will provide business for them until they die.
They've created a consumer.
Yeah, they've created a consumer. They've created a market. So they're looking at it as, you know, this is a child, but I can make money from this child. So let me condition them. So let us advertise, you know, like to the children and all that. Those advertisements are there. And sadly, our country is not even looking at that. They're not looking at those, you know, subtle
the ripple
things,
effects.
the ripple effects. The Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, I think, was it last year, they released a report on the statistics on obesity. And they are slowly rising, slowly rising.
Yeah.
And this is something that should worry us. And so that's why, and that takes me into my third thing that I do. I educate people on these indigenous foods. So I'll cook the meals and share them on my social media.
Yes.
Because we live in a social media era.
Yes.
So I cook the meals and share them on my social media.
Okay.
So somebody will ask me, how do I cook this? How do I cook the yams, the ndumas, and all that? And then I'll provide the recipe. So making those meals, the traditional meals, nutritious, because that's what we are lacking now.
You've touched on something that has just brought me back to a discussion I think we had just a little bit before we got here. Before we went live, and it's something I just caught on while I was, you know, garnering you know, some of the topics we're going to talk about. And the climate smart agriculture strategy of 2017-2026, I mentioned it to you. And one of the highlights of the objective for the Kenya climate smart agricultural strategy was to adapt to climate change. So build resilience in agricultural system, minimize emissions. We've been talking about that this whole time. And this strategy of 2017 to 2026 already in place, creating policies like this. Who are the initiators of such things, and what can we do? Because we're seeing the ball has already started rolling. This is an initiative that exists in Kenya as we speak, funded and, you know, fully funded and fully participated. Who are these people who are running these projects, and how can we get the ball rolling with them? Maybe we could change the strategy for 2026. We have 2 years to go. Yeah.
He who funds that policy controls it.
Yes, that's as well. That's true.
So I'm sure there's an organization behind that policy.
Yes.
And there's something they aim to achieve with that policy.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that all the policies in the country are not pro-Kenyans. There are some policies that are pro-Kenyans, right? But majority of the policies, if we examine them correctly, they have an agenda.
Okay. So there's no good at all.
There's no good at all. And we have to be very, very careful how we look at these policies, or how we push, we push them. We have to examine them, because some of them are hidden in the narrative, of climate change. We want to make communities more resilient. But what happens is that communities end up being exploited.
Yes.
And so we need to examine and critically assess who are the people behind these policies. What's their intention? What do they intend to achieve? I'll give you an example. we have a policy, it's rather a strategy in agriculture, right?
Yes.
It's the Agricultural Sector Transformation Strategy of 2019 till 2029, a 10-year strategy, yeah?
It's quite large.
That is supposed to help Kenya modernize agriculture, yeah? And one of the key things, and I never tire to speak about this strategy, one of the things that caught my attention is we will know that we are transitioning towards modern agriculture if Kenyans consume more processed foods, if farmers are kicked out of farming, and land. So land is no longer communally owned.
Yes.
And one of the impediments to transformation of agriculture in our country, as listed in that strategy, is the communal ownership of land. What does that mean? That this strategy, the main goal is to have Kenyans not own land. Because when you say kick farmers out of farming, keep farmers out of farming, they don't have land. Remember, land is a key factor of production. We have 3 factors of production, right?
Yeah.
Land, labor, and capital.
Yes.
So land is the most important factor of production. So if farmers have no land, obviously they're kicked out of farming, right?
Yes, they're not a participant.
Precisely. So if this land that we have as Kenyans is no longer owned by us,
Yes.
but by external individuals who are not Kenyans,
Yes.
who want to come and do or carry out large-scale industrial agriculture for export, right?
Yes.
Where does that leave us as Kenyans? We're importing a lot of food. And now this brings in the aspect of Kenyans consuming more processed foods.
Yes.
Look at what is happening right now in our cities or in towns. We have a lot of fast food joints. Even in the areas that I never thought I would see fast food outlets. Like areas like Kakamega, I never imagined that I would see.
But now they're opening up everywhere.
They are opening
Where
up.
there's a highway and a petrol station, there has to be.
Yes, there has to be one.
Yes.
So what does that mean? We're actually consuming a lot of processed foods. As a generation, what does that do to us? The working generation, youthful generation, able to build our country. We are curtailing that because we will have children who are obese, youths who are obese. They will spend more time in hospitals than building our country. So will we ever develop?
My God.
No.
We have a lot of
That's what I said. These issues are actually interlinked. You cannot separate.
Yeah.
You cannot separate them.
Thank you for that conversation. One last message you have for the Kenyan community, especially as an agroecologist. What would you say?
Buy land. Grow your own food. Keep your own livestock. Save your own seeds. It's important to be sovereign and it's important to be self-sufficient. When you look at your plate, look at it proudly and say, this is food that I have chosen to eat. Your plate should not remind you that you're being colonized through food.
Claire Kelo, environmental scientist and agroecologist. Thank you so much for watching the Social Newsroom. Today it was all about green imperialism. My name is Kate Thanks for watching.